Hello and welcome back to the Wisdom for Humanity podcast series. My name is James Malins, I am the Wisdom Guide, and in this series we're going to be helping you to go from your present state to your desired state through wisdom, knowledge and real life experiences. And I am absolutely delighted to be bringing you the beautiful Jaime Kozak, and today we are going to be talking about the ego. Now, I cannot wait to hear Jaime's wisdom on this because a lot of people have a very different opinion on the ego, and well, we're going to be diving into it beautifully tonight. So before I give Jaime the floor, what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of a background story on Jaime. So Jaime is an extremely spiritual person who is going to be leading people to the answers they are looking for. She has studied extensively with the personality Seth, and tonight we are going to be looking into the ego, what the ego really is, and why it is important to our lives. So how are you doing today, Jaime?
Good. Thank you so much for having me, James. I really appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you coming on as well. So what we'll do is we'll dive straight into it. Now, what I want to ask you for the first question is, what actually is the ego?
So this is a really good question, James, and a really good way just to kind of like open up to this whole discussion. So there's a lot of different angles that you can take the ego as. And for myself and through my studies, what I have found is that the ego, which is more of an esoteric term, but we'll just call the ego for this just a second, is the division of the spiritual essence, per se, that is found within all of us, and how we go and deliver things into the physical human form. That would be in regards to like emotions. So that's how we express ourselves. So a lot of people can be kind of confused about the ego too, because if you actually look at the definition of ego, it is more along the lines of being self-centered or brash or conceited or whatever. But so in this discussion, that's not what we're talking about. So the ego would be kind of the filter, like I said, of going from a spiritual essence through into the human form. So pretty basic when you really think about it in that regard. So yeah, so that would be what the ego is defined.
It's super interesting though, because like we were just having a brief discussion before this interview / episode, and we were saying how obviously there's this big thing with society where the ego is labelled massively with a negative label. However, and especially through my wisdom and through what I've learned over the years, is that everything can be flipped over. And I think that a lot of people have forgotten that there's always two sides to a coin. Right, and whereas people are saying that the ego is such a bad thing, and I've been guilty of this as well. You know, I've probably preached this sometimes, saying that we should have our ego in check. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I've done a video on that. However, when we think about it, in the beautiful way you put it, is that it's our spirit, shall we say? Even though I know that that's not quite a word that a certain individual or / personality enjoys to use, but for the purposes of this, we'll say it, that our spirit is then, divided down, and it gives us this ability to express ourselves through these five senses and through our physical form. Because when we start to look at higher dimensions, and for some of you, you're going to want to stick with this because this is going to be some really important teachings right here. When we look at the higher dimensions and perhaps dimensions that we cannot perceive within ourselves right now, what we've also got to understand is that there's got to be a connection between it. You know, there's got to be some kind of higher connection between these dimensions and ourselves. So it's really interesting when, you mentioned that it's a division, because there was something I learned a little while ago as well, is that there is I don't like using this word to do with this either, but there's a quote theory that we are the universe that is experiencing itself, i.e. we have been put here so that it can experience itself. So I find it super, super interesting. Would you be able to sort of go into a little bit more about why you think that people have such a negative opinion associated with the ego?
Well, because it causes us to have to stop. Being that we have that emotional connection with the ego, a lot of times that delivers a negative connotation to things, because when we have to be vulnerable enough to reflect on our reactions,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it's because of something negative, something that we don't prefer to have to deal with in our day-to-day interactions with people, with ourselves, whatever it may be. So, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be on a spiritual terms. I mean, you can be, an atheist, you can be, completely into the structured religion, but this all applies because in the ego, it's kind of to the effect of where we have to, like I said, reflect on things. And in that difficulty, we sometimes want to find a scapegoat. We want to find a reason, something to blame. And that's where a lot of times people have that bad rap. Oh, it's just my ego, and I hate the ego and I want to get rid of the ego. So one of my founding truths and principles that I live by is that the ego is not the enemy, hence the title of this podcast. And the reason being is because when we see the ego as being a negative, I like to call it, people feel that it's almost like there's some sort of parasitic evilness inside of us. So how is that going to affect how you then filter your true self into the human form? Well, if that's acting as the filter, then it's going to be not all, but it's going to have a filter of a negative undertone to it. And when we feel like there's something evil in us, then it's almost like we're trapped, that we have to deal with this negative entity inside of us, and there's no way around it. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to feel like I have some like poltergeist type deal inside of me. Okay? I like to live more on a positive side, right? So, so when you understand, and like you said, when you flip, it's all about perspective, right? So when you flip it and say, okay, the ego is not an enemy, the ego is my friend. It completely starts to transform your outlook on life, because no longer are you fighting this undefeatable adversary. You realize that it's your most powerful ally. So with that, then you can go and start saying, okay, because you have to remember, going back to what the ego, now we were defining the ego, now we say, okay, well, what does the ego exactly do? It's a filter, right? So with that, you have to think, okay, what is generating these things? Because the ego is bringing to light human emotion, right? So with that, you think, okay, think of all the belief systems, all the things that we have dealt with in life, from the time we were little all the way up. And this could be on a society standpoint, this can be in a family structure standpoint, this can be a cultural standpoint. There's so many different variables that go into play in regards to how the ego is trained. That's an important thing. How the ego is trained to react to external environmental factors. Okay? So it takes the time, we have to take the time to start really reflecting and doing internal work. Because if the ego works for us, it's going to respond the way that we tell it to. So if you have anxiety in social situations and you don't like that, well, that's just my ego. I'm an introvert, whatever. No, that's how you told your ego to act. So, James, one of the things that really gets me is traffic. Like, it just shoots me off, and I don't know why.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the really interesting things you mentioned was about the ego, and that we obviously experience it through a higher, should we say, a higher dimension or a higher purpose, or even if you're religious, through a higher realm. And one interesting question I've got is, obviously through society we are indoctrinated, right? We're fed information, and that information turns us into specific individuals. Because even with my clients, I've done a lot of work where we've had to undo some of this information and actually get them to the point where they are themselves. What would you say the world would be like if everybody was experiencing it through their quote authentic selves, through their ego, right? Because could you imagine it? 7.8 billion people that are not bound by parental teachings or society's teachings or religious teachings, and they're just here to observe. And just before I let you answer, very interestingly enough, we had a conversation today about animals, okay, and animals with their, their thought process, and we said, do they think in a language? Surely they don't, right? They understand sounds, like if you said, come here, boy, or, sit down and things. They understand sounds eventually, but they just must experience life. So going back to the question, what do you think society would be like if people just experienced instead of being fed a load of information in the beginning?
One word: love.
Aha. Okay.
Love is the core essence of what creation is. That is what divine consciousness is, in my truth. And you were speaking about language and animals and everything. There's so many different spiritual teachers and guides, books and mentors that speak of the same thing, that we are a collective consciousness. And that is not just on a human standpoint. That is the trees and the skies and the animals. And as you had mentioned earlier, that one of the greatest teachers that have really have resonated with me is Seth, the multi-dimensional consciousness. Mm-hmm. And one thing he speaks of in regards to language is that I'm not going to dive into the specific, but as a generalization, that man was connected with nature, and that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But for whatever reasons, like I said, I won't dive into, but man disconnected from nature. And in that disconnection, then all of a sudden, these different belief systems started to come into play. And that love, which actually is wordless, then began to develop. The importance of that is that it's in an energetic connection. So the more that we retrain that ego to be as it's always intended to be, for the expression of the divine to come out in all of us, that is where the power is.
Yeah.
And excuse me, it's that whole energetic exchange.
Yeah.
So when we begin to be able to, not to say break down the ego, and go back core to the truth, into that loving relationship with the ego. Because mind you, they always say you have to love yourself before you can love another, right?
Yeah,
that means loving your ego. Loving your ego. Saying, I love my ego. That's going to be, I'm going to need to put like a mantra on a shirt. I love my ego. People are like, this girl is messed up. Like, no, let me explain. So, because what Seth states is that there is no division of self. So, that's extremely powerful in itself, too, because then it allows us to see that though the mind is trying to conceptualize it as, okay, well, this is my spiritual side, and this is my human side, and human side is a weakness and whatever else, so that we just have to deal with. No, it's a way that everything is full circle.
Yeah. When
we allow it to be. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's super interesting, and for the people watching right now, we've already discussed during this episode that the ego is a connection between the higher dimensions and the higher beings, and then when we come down and we experience it into the world, so I want you to visualize this, right? Your ego that is connected to these higher dimensions, and now you're experiencing into the world. The interesting thing you said, Jamie, is that we were connected with nature, hence the past tense. Right now we're got a lot of deforestation going on. We've got global warming. Don't know if you believe it or not, guys. We're not going to go down that debate, but we've got things going on in the world that are harming nature, and it's obvious to see. I don't have to see the videos of the plastic on the oceans. I just have to go out my backyard. and often I will be picking stuff up and bringing it in. So when we have this connection with nature, what you'll actually end up finding is that things start to become a lot more synchronized. Okay, and like you said, the full circle. You know, I was even talking to a chap the other day, and he said, confirming it for me, is that when we're doing that earth walking and then we're walking out into nature, we're actually getting rid of the toxicity in our bodies. We're getting rid of these chemicals, right, that we've been putting into our bodies through foods and other things like that.
Yeah.
Again, that's a real deep one we're not going to go into right now. But it's just important to know that when it comes to the ego, if the ego is the self, then you should be happy with your ego. And it comes back full circle to one of the biggest teachings that I've got, is that you are in control. You know, and there are a lot of people that are going around with a dark cloud and smoke surrounding them because they're not focusing on themselves. You know, they're not focusing on that ego. If you do not like who you are, that doesn't mean that your ego is a separate, like you said, is a separation from you, and that's what needs to be destroyed, and that's evil, and that's, quote, the devil, and all that kind of thing. No. It just means that there are a few things that you've been taught that perhaps need to be untaught. I.e., if you're not expressing love to other people, then you've got to learn how to express love to other people, you know? And this is, and it's like I say, you know, if you're a guy watching this, or a woman who's extremely alpha and you don't believe in that lovey-dovey stuff, like, that's not what it's about. Love and appreciation is strongly connected with respect. And with respect is connected with having that appreciation, which is connected with having that care and that kindness towards other people. So this is how we're linking all of this in, you know. Your ego is you, right? It is your personality. It is your, quote, spirit. Would we be right in saying that, Jamie?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's your spirit, but it's the way that the spirit expresses through the human physical form.
Fantastic. So would you say that with our ego, when we're it's like the stopgap, right? It's the stopgap between the universe and between our physical reality. Exactly. And because the filter.
Because we live, they call it the earth plane. So one thing that Seth also speaks about is that we are placed, and once again, this could be a little bit more far-fetched for some, but this is something that I've embraced, and it makes sense, resonates. But on this earth plane, this is a specific reality. And in this reality, we have to abide by a law of what Seth calls root assumptions. So basically, these are physical structures that we must follow through. And one of them is being a physical body, right? So it's a spirit. This is just a car. We're like virtual reality right now, okay? And in that, the goggles are like, it's our ego. We have to see through something, right? So that's what it is. So, yeah. So
that's fascinating.
And the most important thing to really recognize is that the ego works for us. The ego responds how we tell it to respond. We just have to understand that. And when we do, that's when life, it can be exponentially transformed for you. Because when you see something that you don't like, you stop, you reflect, and okay, this is how now we are going to respond. And it takes some time, and it will keep cycling through, because remember, lessons, and we will continue to have lessons until we achieve that lesson, and that lesson no longer exists. So once we understand, and the ego will be like, "Oh, but this is how we used to do things." No. Okay, yeah. You know what? Sometimes you just got to talk to your ego a little bit too. Like, okay, dude, let's talk. We need to have a little discussion. And a lot of people use it as, okay, like saying you're talking to yourself as a little kid.
Yeah.
Throwing a tantrum or whatever it may be, and be okay. This is how we used to do things, but this is how we're going to do it now. And you continue just, be kind to yourself. Once again, love yourself through the process. And then before you know it, that ego is going to start working for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's super fascinating. And I think that this is a really big lesson for some guys, because, as you're watching this and you're feeling like you don't have that control, like this is the proof, This is the proof that you can control what it is that you put out there. You just need to understand your filter. You've got to understand your filter. You've got to get in check with it. And if you don't understand it, because a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people where they're just, they go around saying, "Oh, I'm going to go and punch somebody," Have you ever heard anybody say that phrase? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what does that even mean? They've just got no understanding of their filter in front of them. They're like literally have said to my face, like, oh, I feel like going to punch someone in the face. I'm like, well, you're obviously not, are you? It's just, it's that fascinating ideal that people just have not been taught to understand and put the right film in front of that filter. Like your ego, let's just say your ego is the steering wheel. Right? If your ego is the steering wheel, then you steer it as to where you want it to go. You have the power. You've got the understanding. So I absolutely love that, Jamie. And
thank you.
One thing I want to do is dive down into how can we use the ego? How can we use it to better our lives and to show other people how to lead and love a better life?
Well, I think through anything, it's always not word, it's through your actions. So, and being that the ego is a way of a form of expressing as a human, just people will see a transformation. And hey, what happened to you? You're like completely different. Like, you're chill and happy all the time, and not necessarily happy all the time, but just a peace, right? So, using the ego once again is, kind of what we've been talking about, throughout the podcast. So yeah, utilizing the ego is just, once again, it's our tool. It's our tool to express. So the more that we are willing to do the internal work, the more that we'll see progress. So, and really, it really boils down to is vulnerability. We have to be vulnerable with ourselves, because I think that's where the term ego for this was coined, an ego, because a lot of people don't want to admit that their actions are actually created by them. Oh, I don't want to admit that. You have to drop everything, once again, getting into that kind of open space within you and be vulnerable. Because mind you, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is the aspect of being completely authentic, but a lot of times the ego is trained to think of every hypothetical situation that could come from that response.
Yeah.
And it freaks us out. So what's the ego going to do? It's going to freak out. It's going to evoke the emotional and physical responses into our body. So, we start shaking or whatever, blah, 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 blah. That is all trained emotional stuff that filters through the ego, and then all of, the hormones or whatever else starts racing through the body, the testosterone or the adrenaline or whatever it may be, and then before you know it, you have a full-blown meltdown or whatever it may be. But mind you, it's all controllable. So once again, we have to be vulnerable enough to really dissect and recognize that for what it is.
Interesting. I think one of the real big teachings here, guys, is take responsibility. There are so many people who I speak to, and all these teachings end up coming full circle around to the very same principles, right? If you are not taking responsibility for your actions, and you're saying that, oh, I can't, I always act I always respond before I act, before I think about it. If a situation's coming my way, I let everything go out there and I fight and all this kind of stuff. It's all BS. You have the power to control yourself. Why? Because I learned it. I learned how to control myself, and I learned the hard way. And if you do not learn, what will happen is you will start to destroy the relationships that are in your life and that are surrounding you, because you're just not focusing on them. You're focusing on every other excuse as to why you can't be a good person. And some of you might be angels, right? And this can still apply to you, because if, like you said, Jamie, if you're going through motions where you've got anxiety, right, which is just a human response. I think some people say that they've got anxiety, but it's, I understand that there are obviously different levels to it, but I still believe that it's something that you can understand. You can understand why you're feeling anxious. Is it a lack of confidence? Is it an upsetting emotion due to where you are in life? Is it because you're scared of the unknown? Is it because you're fearful? Is it because you don't know what to do or where to go? Like, why is it responding? Because if you were sat on the Bahamas, with a drink in your hand and no one was around you and the sun was on your face, what would you have to be anxious about, right? What would you have to be nervous about? So one interesting thing is, I mean, if you could sit there and be anxious, like, well, some people might say, well, I'm afraid of death, it can happen at any point. Okay, I understand that, but ask yourself why you're afraid of death, right? Ask yourself why you're afraid of death. It is inevitable. And I would say the reason why you're afraid of death is probably because you've listened to people that say that it's just a black veil that comes over. The curtain comes, everyone starts clapping and you're gone. Right? So you've got to realise why. Ask yourself the right questions. Asking yourself the right questions is taking responsibility and it is showing an understanding. And some of you guys that are going through life and you're experiencing life now, you're experiencing it on half a level because you haven't taken that responsibility. And it's possible. And if you've got anxiety, you've got depression, guess what? It is possible to get out of it. I'm not saying it's guaranteed for everybody because it's down to you. I had somebody the other night say that it's impossible to cure it. Guess what? For her, it is impossible to cure it because that's what she believes. And until she's ready to listen or accept another wavelength or another path or another ideal, that will be her reality. And I quote, her reality. Because what is our reality? It is only what we've experienced up to this present moment. I could think I'm the most handsome man in the world. That's my reality. Some people might think I'm ugly as hell. Right? That my reality might not be the reality for other people.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, Jimmy, would you say the ego connects into that? You see, my ego, through my filter, I see myself as a beautiful human being in this quote, in this experience, right? Some other people's ego might not like the size of my nose. They might think I've got a big forehead. I don't know. So it's all about understanding this, guys. Understanding that your filter is heavily dependent upon the information you've received to this present moment. So
it is the creator of your reality.
Jamie, the next question I've got to ask you, where do you see yourself in the future?
Wow. That is a really good question that you just... Well, let's see. Honestly, James, I would have to say that I really don't know. It is one of those things that I have really started to embrace the life of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And you might think, wow, that's kind of being kind of irresponsible, isn't it? But to be honest with you, I think it's the most responsible thing and most loving act that I could give to myself. Okay. And what I mean by that is that through society structure, it's that linear thinking where you plan everything out. Well, when you do that, which is the responsible quote unquote way, when you do that, you really bring limitation to your life. And there has been a lot of things, particularly in the last year and a half that I have done, that really has promoted me and propelled me into a life of uncertainty. And to be honest with you, James, it has been the most incredible ride of my life. Yeah. And I would never take it back. Yes, through it and going through this whole thing, I've really been applying this whole ego is not the enemy. And when I've been scared or, oh my gosh, how's this going to happen or how's this going to happen, blah, 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 I realized the most magical things appear because I'm allowing it to. So if anything, to answer your question, it is just love, expressing love and
going with the flow.
Yeah. And let that divine guidance guide me to where I need to go. So
I love that. That's beautiful. And this is it, guys. I guess, from not from all aspects of life do you have to have an absolute definite plan. Sometimes it is just having an idea, or perhaps just an idea of enjoying your life, loving every moment of it, and trusting in that, and having that as a desire, and then it'll help you to get to where you want to be. So Jamie, on a final note for the episode today, where can people find you? What is it you'd like to tell them about yourself to finish?
Well, thank you, James. I would appreciate that. And for all of you who don't know, my main profession, I guess you could say, is I'm a artist, graphic designer, but I do a lot of more of the spiritual sect so doing image quote creations, working with spiritual teachers, mentors, that kind of thing. But I also do, speaking of the image quote thing, I created a motivational, inspirational page. I don't like to call it spiritual just because it has sometimes a negative connotation to it. But it's called I am called JK, or just Jaime Kozak on Facebook, and it's the same on Instagram as well, where I at least once to 2 times a day create image quotes and then have a lesson application that goes along with that quote that I just go and share with people. And really, truly, the reason why I do this is it's my way of expressing my love to the rest of the collective, because I feel that the more that we can all, as one, as an individual and then as a collective, bring love into it, the more that everyone is going to feel love. So it's something that I've really embraced, and I rather enjoy, and has given me the ability to be able to connect with other amazing individuals such as yourself, James. So it's definitely been an amazing journey for me thus far. So.
No, I love it. And if anybody really, really likes the podcast cover of this specific podcast, then you can thank the beautiful Jamie for that, because she designed it.
Yes, thank you.
And she did a damn good job of doing it. So if you're looking for any help with your own spiritual ventures or just any ventures in general, then make sure you give her a bell. And those links will be in the podcast description. You'll be able to go and find those out. And on a final note for me, make sure you go and sign up to my email list. So what are you going to be getting? James, what am I going to be getting if I'm going to give you my email? You're going to be getting 30 days worth of emails, which are going to help you to totally change your life. These emails are going to be specifically tailored and designed to take you down a path that gives you the right wisdom and knowledge to help you become the person you want to be. So, if that seems to you like a good reason to give me your email, then go ahead and click down on the link below as well. You'll see that in there. And listen, guys, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for tuning in, for getting this far, for watching this podcast, for sharing it with the people that you love. I appreciate every single one of you. And from myself, take care. And from yourself, Jamie?
Thank you so much, everybody.
No worries. Beautiful. Take care, guys. Love you all. And we'll see you in the next episode.